Hey everybody, my name is Karen. I'm a grateful member of Alanon. For those of you who are confused, I am also an alcoholic. Some people call it a double winner. I say it takes a village. That's what I think. I was asked to come and be your Alanon speaker and talk about my journey. So I'll qualify myself a little bit for Alanon so that you know where I come from. I was raised by two adult children of alcoholics. I didn't have alcoholism in my home growing up, but I sure had the effects. I had many uncles, aunts, grandparents who all struggled with alcoholism, although I didn't know what that was. There's a lot of things that come with alcoholism, and some of you may be aware of them. Some of them you may have experienced, like me. So I think I was, at 9 years old, I was abused by an alcoholic uncle. And I talk about that because I know many people sitting here have experienced that. There's no, we don't talk about that a lot in this program. And I think it's important to bring it to the forefront, that we share that. And that brings with it a lot of stuff. For me, one of the things that brought about was my confirmation that I had to depend on myself only. That it was my responsibility to create a safe place only. That kind of isolation makes it difficult to form normal relationships. It makes it difficult to do healing as we, move through life, through relationships, through important parts of our life. And so growing up in my teenage years, I acted out a lot. I acted out with bad choices, and bad choices in the things that I did and the people that I did them with. And it's funny that I had this crazy sense of myself that I'd still be okay, that I could get through it, that I could handle it. And I don't know if that came from a belief really that I could do that, or if it came from a resolution that I was the only one that could do it. I was the only one I had, right? So that was my only choice. So for me, that manifested itself in taking control. And I took control of everything I could. I don't like surprises. I still don't like surprises because surprises aren't always good. I struggled in school. I struggled in school mainly because conforming, I didn't want to conform. I wanted to make all the decisions, right? That's impacted me in my family life. I struggled with obviously my parents. My dad was old school, right? Children should be seen and not heard. I grew up in the 60s. Even though I'm only 25, I grew up in the 60s. And so there was a revolution happening for women starting in the 60s. And it was about power and control, and it was about finding out who you were, inequality, and all of those things. And I grabbed onto that with both hands. And that took me to different places. That took me to places where I tried different things. I got into hunting and fishing because I liked it. I got into shooting competitively, all the things that my traditional parents felt I shouldn't be doing. At the same time, I was still wearing hot pants and mini skirts, right? So that was 50 years and 50 pounds ago. But at the time, they were the cool thing. And so I was just really struggling. I was struggling with finding a sense of safety, finding a place where I could feel like where I could be me, and trying to find out who I was, right? So through my teenage years, I made lots of mistakes. One of those mistakes was, choosing some really reliable boyfriends, right? So at 17, I married the cutest boy in the gang, and he was super cute and a horrible human being, right? But he provided me with what I needed, and that was to feel terrible and to feel bad about myself, because that's what I was used to. And so that's what I chose. When I think of him today, I have empathy for him, because nothing has changed in his life. He's still a violent, untrustworthy human being, and he's not found peace in his life. I had a child at that time, so it was just before I turned 18, we had our first child. And I think it was, I'm going to say, within 6 months of the marriage. I know the date of it, but I don't know where that was. I realized that I had to do it on my own again. And so I walked away from the marriage because there was physical abuse, there was a lot of drinking, and I was wanting to protect my child. And it's funny, a funny thing about women is often they will leave for the children, but they won't leave for themselves. And that was my story for sure. I left for my kids, right? So I was on my own. I was 18 years old, a single mom, still doing it on my own. Still trying to control the outcome. And I managed to get through, go back to college, and still making bad choices, right? Still making bad relationship choices. I was addicted to alcoholics. If I went to the P&E with 10,000 people there, I could find a single alcoholic in the middle of the playground. I'm sure I could do it. and we'd end up dating, because there was a sickness. There was a sickness in that person that met me where I was at. My sponsor used to say water finds its own level, and that was really true for me, is that I would seek people out who met me where I was at. And where that was I was unavailable. I was emotionally and mentally unavailable for that relationship, for all my relationships in that part of my life. And so I chose people who I would not regret losing. I chose people who I could outsmart, who I could out-talk, because that way I could stay safe and I could stay in control. And I continued to do that. I remember my sponsor saying, why do you keep trying to tie a racehorse to a donkey? And that was the truth, is I would always, tie myself to someone who was stuck and try and pull them through life, try and fix them. My daughter used to tell me, she said, is this one a fixer-upper, Mom? And they all were. I should have my own show, my own makeover show. Right? Wouldn't that be a good show? Let's see if we can get that, right? The new fixer-upper, AA and Alanon style. And so I remember I don't even know where I met this person, but it had nothing to do with program, and I had already been in program, and I met this person, and he asked me on a date. We went on a date, and during that date he said, well, I need to tell you I'm an alcoholic. And I thought, well, of course you are. So there's just no getting away from it, right? As I grew up, I found out new things about my family that I had no idea, because we didn't talk about things in our family. Stiff upper lip and all that, right? My grandmother was an alcoholic, and I did realize that later in life, that happy hour happened pretty much any time we were at her place. That the only alcohol she was ever out of was rye. And she was, I seem to be out of rye. Could you go get me some? It's like every time. And, the cigarette burns in the carpet. And as I got older, I started to think about my mom. and what my mom grew up with. So my mom was in the 40s. Her parents divorced, late 30s, early 40s. And that was when divorce was not cool. It was certainly not accepted, wildly accepted. And I started to figure out some of the things I learned from my mom that I've carried with me for a long time. And part of that was a mistrust of people. And my mom mistrusted people, right? She had been abandoned in her youth. She never talked about abuse, so I don't know. She didn't talk about those things, hers or mine. She just didn't trust people, particularly men. And so I started out with this mistrust, and yet picked the most trustworthy people I could find sorry if I've dated any of you, the most untrustworthy people I could find to have that self-fulfilling prophecy. And that's what I sought out. And there were a couple times I can remember, I had relationships with really well people, like these well gentlemen, really, and I was like, whew, that's boring. Who wants to do that? What a nice guy, right? Because my brain was wired for drama, for rage, for anxiety. It was wired for that. And so that's what I sought out, because I was looking to find water to fill my own level, right? So it was in 1991. I think we moved to Prince George in 1990. I had married a guy who was, I know it's shocking, an alcoholic. And I didn't know anything at that point. I knew nothing about AA or Alanon, nothing. I knew there was alcoholics. I'd been to a couple birthdays for family members who had got into the program, but I didn't know because we didn't talk about it. And so in 1990, I moved up to Prince George with my then husband and my oldest daughter and my middle daughter. And soon after that, about a year after that, I ended up in Alanon. And how that happened was he started talking about AA, that he used to go to AA, and I was like, okay, sure, go. Like, I don't know what any of that means. And he didn't go very often. When we got together, he didn't go at all to AA. He was sober, but he didn't go to program. And so when he started saying, well, maybe I should start going to AA. So I drank in the house, and our friends drank in the house. And then all of a sudden, he started drinking in the house. And life came unglued. Not that it was great before that. It was not great, but it was just your garden variety dysfunction. It wasn't fearing for my life dysfunction. But once the drinking hit, it was fearing for my life. And I can remember going to a meeting with him. I think it might have even been a Roundup. And I remember his sponsor, some of you might remember Ruben, his sponsor getting up and speaking, and I was sitting in the back of the room, and I was mortified because I knew that my husband spoke to this man, but he got up and told our story. He was talking about us. He was telling the things that were happening in my home. And I was furious and mortified. And when he came down from the front after the meeting, I said to him, how dare you? Like, that's private information. And he's looking at me incredulously because he was telling his story. And he said, I wasn't telling your story, Karen. I was telling my story. And it hit me that everybody in this room was living the same life, or similar, or worse. He promptly gave me an Alanon member's number and said, I think you might want to call this person. Thank God. And he did, and I called her, and at that point, this is what was happening in our home. I can remember one night having to give my teenage daughter the telephone, because we didn't have cell phones back then. But we had portables, which was a big jump, just saying. Take that downstairs. If you hear anything upstairs, call 911. And that was okay. Because that was surviving. I can remember my husband saying, if you walk out of that door and you take one of those kids, I'll put a bullet in your head. And it wasn't a threat. It was a promise. I can remember when I left and I was driving to the transition home with my kids in the back and coming up to a stop sign, and the truck in front of me was a truck from my husband's company, and just freezing. And after they left, it wasn't him. After they left, I probably sat at that light for an annoyingly 10 minutes before I could get my shit together to drive to the transition house. And because we were going to die in that house, if we stayed in that house. Because that's what alcohol does. It's what it does to our minds. It's what it does to our emotions. And here's the funny thing, he wasn't drinking at the time. But he was not well. And he was not recovered. And I learned the difference between sobriety and recovery. And there is a very big difference. Because in sobriety, that rage is still there. And that anger is still there. I remember being at an Alanon meeting and people talking about their husband drinking and tearing up the place. And I remember thinking, God, if I could just see a bottle on the table and know it was going to be a shitty day. But I didn't have that. It was just luck of the cards, if it was going to be a good day, what way the wind was blowing. When you get up and you ask your spouse, in your mind, what kind of day are we going to have today? What kind of moment are we going to have? It starts off good, but then maybe you're out of milk. Right? One time I remember having to grab the kids, run to the bedroom, because I accidentally, when one of the kids set the table, they put a dessert fork at his side. This is the kind of trauma that alcohol does. And here's the funny thing. I knew what to do when it was violent. I knew how to get out of it. I knew how to calm it down. I knew how to behave. It was the quiet times that were worse. It was the quiet times when something was brewing that was worse, and you're waiting, because quiet rage is like the white of a flame, isn't it? That quiet rage is different than the big flamboyant orange-red flame, right? We all know to stay out of that. So I came to Alanon because I had spent the previous night lying in my bed trying to figure out how I could die and not leave my children to him. That's what brought me. And when at my first meeting, this is how sick I was. My first meeting, I thought, I hope I can get well and help all these people. Oh my God, denial. It's a powerful thing, not just a river. And I remember thinking, still, I stayed in my head. I don't know if anyone experiences that, but I had lived years in my head, because if I lived here, fuck, that hurt. And I wasn't doing that, but I lived in my head. No emotion, just thinking, right? And that's why I was like, oh, gee, I hope I'll do these steps. It's got to take 2 weeks, max. And then I'll be able to help other people, just like me. God. Anyways. It didn't take me, I think it was my 3rd Alanon meeting, I cried. And I think it was probably I was in 6 months when I stopped crying. And what I realized was that football that I had in my stomach was finally dissipating. That football that I carried around every moment of every day, waiting for one of those landmines to go off in my home, finally dissipated. I was not an alcohol pour-outer. I didn't do that. Once I poured alcohol out for one reason only, so he would have to go get more so I could get out. That was the only reason. I found a sponsor right away when I got in Alanon. The lady that I spoke to when I came into Alanon was amazing. But she was very kind and very gentle. And I knew a strong-willed gal like me isn't going to be able to be corralled by a nice lady like her. So I chose someone who I knew would speak the truth, who I knew would call me on my bullshit. Because don't get me wrong, I had a part. Because when that flame started catching, my response was, I was not a meek and mild, I'll get out of the way. I was like, fuck this. No, you won't. Yeah, right? I had my can of gasoline and I was ready for anything. So I started to learn a little bit about my response. I started to learn about my part. Accepting unacceptable behavior because I didn't want to rock the boat. That was a big one for me. I had relationships in Alanon like I had never had. My sponsor was probably the first real friend I ever had, because she knew me better than anyone else in the whole world, even me. And she taught me how to be a better person. She taught me how to be well, one step at a time. She taught me. She could read my mind sometimes. She was a real bitch. Right? Those of you that know who she was, right? We love you, Dixie. God bless you. But... And she would call me, we'd talk on the phone, I'd swear to her, I'd hang up, and she'd just wait, and I'd phone her back. But she never pulled any punches. You know why? Because it was life or death at my house. She wasn't teaching me how to crochet. She was teaching me how to survive and flourish in a dysfunctional home. She was teaching me how to save my children from going through what I went through. She made me do the steps right away. None of this, oh yeah, well, when I'm ready. No. You're ready because you're dying. And as I got empowered with knowledge, I learned about alcoholism. And I learned about alcoholism not so that I could excuse his behavior, but so I could have some understanding, so that I could understand that it wasn't my fault. Because if there's one thing us alcoholics like to do, is make you responsible for our shitty behavior. If I can pass it off as your fault, right? and that's what he would do too. So we started doing the steps. The unmanageable part, that was easy. Because there was no denying my home was unmanageable. If you're giving your teenage daughter a phone, telling her to call 911 if things sound bad downstairs, your life is a shit show. Because mine sure was. If you have things packed in your trunk for a quick getaway and money at a friend's house, it's time to get well. And if you don't have that and you need to, do it today. I had 2 sets of clothes, 2 sets of kids' clothes, a suitcase in my trunk for years so that I could make a quick getaway. I had money that I pilfered from the grocery fund at my sponsor's house in case I needed it. The women that came into my life at that time in Alanon came in really when I was dying. I was dying spiritually, emotionally, and I was at risk of dying physically. And I can remember my life then. My kids called them all Grandma Dixie, right? Auntie Gwen, Mrs. McGinnis, or different people's were like family members to them. And they became my family because they were the healthiest people I knew. And they were shit shows too. We're all shit shows still, fighting every day to get better, right? Like I'm still a shit show. I've just spent like the last 2 weeks hiding in my house. We're still a shit show. But we're trying to get recovery. We're working the steps. We're working with others. Hopefully that's why we're here. And I remember doing step 5, actually step 4. And step 4 was a turning point in my life. I have my little blueprint. In Alanon, we have like a little, back then, it was the only option we had, was a little blueprint. And I went through it. So my step 4 consisted, they asked questions, and you answered them. Or most people did. I put yes, no, sometimes. It's asking me about my own behaviors. Well, sometimes I did that. Yeah, I've done that, but I don't do that anymore. Like no depth, no concept. And so I proudly went over to my sponsors to do step 5. Here we go. I got the book all completed. Took me like probably 2 hours, no biggie. And she looked at my book and she said, "Great work. So grab a coffee, let's have a seat." And we were there for like 5 or 6 hours. And we went through every question. And I answered every question completely with her. And then I sat there mortified because now she knew all the things, right? Because when you've spent your whole life protecting yourself and hiding who you are and who your family is, to put that great foot forward so that no one knows, no one suspects that you almost died yesterday, or right, that you don't have any groceries. To be sitting there suddenly realizing, without meaning to, that someone knew me inside out. They knew the truth. Not my partner's truth, not my husband's truth, mine. The things that I had done, the times I ran down the road after him in the car. Like all the bullshit, right? All of it. The times that I manipulated situations so that I could get what I want. All of those. And I just sat there. And she must have known I was terrified. And she pulled me up and she gave me a hug and she told me she loved me. And I'd been told, someone was always telling me they loved me because that's what I sought out, right? Some sick bastard to love me, that's what I was looking for. But that was the first time I knew that she loved me, who I really, really was, the sick me, right? When someone can love the sick you got it. What more can we ask for? And that was a turning point in my life. And that turning point turned into daily practice. That turning point turned into learning to be that person who didn't want to be that crazy girl who was surviving. And I learned to live from her. I learned to live each day to the best of my ability and to make amends when I screw it up. And I still screw it up. The behaviors that, we were talking about this the other day, the behaviors that I learned to survive, when I do my defects of character list, and I do my steps as frequently, at least, I'll say every 2 years, but usually once a year. When I do my steps, I'm always trying to learn something new. I'm always trying to be a better person than I was before. When I go through the steps, if I'm not honest, I'm wasting my time. I'm wasting my time and I'm wasting my sponsor's time. If I'm not telling the truth, aren't I still trying to stay sick? When I figured out that I had the same behaviors as my alcoholic partner, that was humbling. That's humility, right? It's like, oh wait, at least he can say because he's an alcoholic, because he's drunk. I have the same behavior and I'm stone cold sober. And even though I was an alcoholic, I didn't drink when I was surviving. Because I couldn't, because I would have died. Because me drunk, me sober's bad enough. Me drunk, that's like, I've got the gasoline truck, not a bucket. And I'm just gonna blow it up. So the only way I could survive through all that was to stay sober. The friendships that I made there were like no other. When you are at your bottom, and when you are vulnerable to someone, when you do your steps with someone, and it was a village. My husband used to call them the bitches up the heart. So I knew it was working. But when you meet people at your bottom, when you meet people and you are vulnerable and they know they're part of saving your life and you know they're part of saving your life, that is a friendship like no other. Because there's nothing I can't say to those people. And to this day. To this day, there's nothing I can't say to those people. I moved back to town and I still connect with those people. And I can still say, I was an asshole today. And it's okay. And they're like, yeah, I was an asshole last Thursday. Right? And it's okay. I had to forgive myself for surviving. I had to forgive myself for surviving. My whole life became program at that time. My whole life. Everyone that walked through our doors, save one, I think I had one friend that wasn't in program. Everyone that walked through our doors, everyone that we did anything with, it was with AA and Alanon. And our group, it was amazing. We had a huge group. The Heart group used to be, I think we had 36 or 38 people at our max. It was ginormous. So, you didn't have to like everybody, just saying. And there were people that I didn't like who didn't like me, and that's life. But I respected every one of them. And because my sponsor made me, I shut up and listened when they spoke. And I learned from them, despite myself. There was one person in our group, oh my gosh, I could not stand her, and so I bitched to my sponsor about it, and she goes, oh good. So I'm going to ask her to share next week, and you're going to shut up, sit on your hands and listen. I was like, I'm not telling her anyone I don't like anymore. And you know what? She spoke not purposefully directly to me, but she spoke directly to me. I can learn from anybody in any of the rooms. One of the big struggles I had when I came in the program was a higher power. I was a recovering Catholic. I didn't like religion. And whenever anyone said God, I heard religion. And I didn't know how to separate those two. She taught me how to do that. She taught me how to form a creator of my own, a safe place of my own. And that, for me, that has morphed over the years. And always, it has been a kind, loving, non-judgmental entity, always. And she made me write those down. She said, write down, if you were to choose your own higher power, what qualities would they have? Give me 10 qualities. 10 was her favorite number. Write 10 good things about yourself. That took me about, 5 years. So I wrote this out, and she said, perfect. So create that in your mind, and then create it in your life, because those are the qualities that you most want to emulate. So I had this list of what I wanted to be. And when I wasn't that, which happens still to this day, I'm not that, then I can go back, I can make that phone call, right? I can call my sponsor, I can call other people in the program. This program has been such a huge blessing to me. Life is not perfect, but I'm not thinking about how to kill myself without leaving my kids in a bad situation today. I don't have stuff in my trunk today for a quick getaway. I don't have to do that today. I don't have to be remorseful for things that I've done every day. I won't say not ever, because there are times that I have to make amends. I have to say sorry. And in our home, sorry was an action word, right? We would say, someone would say, oh, should I say sorry? You've got some repair work to do. That's what sorry means in my home. Those are all things I learned from people who walked before me. My ego, my self-righteousness, I wanted to do it my own way. I wanted to get the book, read the steps, and then, fix y'all. But that's not how it works. It really is a we program. So I feel blessed. I feel blessed that I had those women in my life. And at that time it was all women. There were men in our group, but it was all women that I was hanging with. I feel blessed that they helped me raise my family. I feel blessed that it was this time of year, actually. It was Thanksgiving. I was still living many years later in that volatile situation. I hadn't left. I was still compromising what I knew I wanted to happen in my life and my home to keep the peace. And I can remember it was, I think it was 1996, 97. I can remember standing in my kitchen. It had been a long day. It had been one of those days I always talk about, when my spouse was in a bad mood. I could picture myself hanging onto the counter, and I could visualize myself being sucked over to the chair where he was to ask him, is everything okay? Is there anything I can do? Are you upset? It was one of those days. And we were having friends for dinner, and alcoholism was alive and well in our home. And I was keeping the peace. And I looked at myself in the reflection of my friends' faces, and I could see I wasn't fooling anyone. There was no peace in that home. And one of the things alcoholism does when you live with alcoholism is it takes a piece of you every time. Every time there's an interaction, every time there is a blowout or a fearful moment, it takes this piece of you. Every time you say yes when you mean no, it takes a piece of you. And I had given so many pieces of myself away day after day after day for years, one piece at a time. I gave myself away to alcoholism. And that day, Thanksgiving Day, I realized I have one piece left. One. And that was the core of me. And if I gave that piece away, there would be nothing left. For my kids, for me, for anyone. That would be it. And that was the day I walked away. I didn't walk away from alcoholism because I signed up a new one eventually. But that moment gave me the strength to keep going. And every time I do the steps, I put another piece back. Still, after all these years, every time I do the steps, I put another piece of myself back. I find another piece. Oh gosh, I gave that piece away too? No, I want to keep that today. And I give it back to myself. And that's because of you. That's because of this amazing program. And that's how I survived. That's how I survived my whole life to the point where I could live. And today I live. And today I have shitty days. Sometimes I have shitty weeks, but I have good moments in those shitty weeks. And it's not the same. And at no point am I thinking about dying to get away. At no point am I thinking about, okay, let's be honest, most of the time it was homicide, but there were times that I thought about, suicide, because that's who I was. And so this program's given me grace. Grace to not be that person anymore, grace to not live in that situation, grace to choose better for me, for my family, grace to use boundaries, try and do them kindly, lovingly. Sometimes that works, not always. It's given me grace to be the person that I always knew I could be. And I can honestly say, we have a saying that though you may not like all of us, you will love us in a very special way. That's one of our sayings in Alanon, part of our readings. And that is 1,000,000% true. There's not one Alanon member I would not be there for. And I don't think there's one that wouldn't be there for me. And that's how we get through together. We get through together. We learn and grow together. With kindness, love, understanding, and really solid boundaries. Thanks, everybody.